welcome to the amazing collection, The Bible for Women, book by book. And once again, I'm just so glad that you could join us, and I'm glad you and the listening audience could join us. Today we're going to be looking at a tiny little book, only 3 chapters, called the book of Zephaniah. And probably you are not real familiar with this little book, so you're in for a surprise today. When we come to the book of Zephaniah, we are going to see a God who is very angry. He is full of wrath, and he is warning the people that he loves, you are filthy. You have digressed to such a point that it is just sickening to watch you. But then at the end, he is going to give hope for something only God can do. And that is to take something filthy and make it into something clean and pure. Before we get to the book, let me just give you a little history. Remember, you can't understand the prophets very well unless you know what's going on. I want you to know that all of the prophets, these writing prophets, really start writing about during the last half of the book of Kings. In other words, you don't have writing prophets just spread all over the place. They really were writing during a specific time in history, and that is because Israel and Judah were becoming so evil, they were getting to a place where God was going to have to say, I've had enough. And so he brought the writing prophets in to scream at the people, stop! I, God, am dead serious about destroying you if you keep on your ways. And so that's the time that the writing prophets were writing. During the last part of Kings, a couple of them were speaking during the exile, and then 3 were speaking after the exile. That's where those prophets are. When Zephaniah, just before he came on the scene, Judah was in a very bad way. You remember King Hezekiah had been a good king. But his son Manasseh, you talk about a rebel. This kid should have been wiped off the face of the earth before he was 4, and why he wasn't, I don't know, because he was the most evil king Judah ever saw. Now remember, he was from the line of David. He knew the responsibility of being a king. He knew the rules that if he obeyed God, all would go well. And yet he deliberately disobeyed God in every way. As soon as he became king, he started setting up all of the idol worship that had taken place in Canaan before Israel came in. He literally took the people back to being as evil as the Canaanites. It was horrible. He brought idols into the temple. He set up astrology so the heavens and the suns were worshipped. Every kind of idol imagined, he brought it in. And then, of course, the final thing was he passed his own son through the fire. Now, when it says that, that means that you take your child and you literally set him on fire and burn him to death as a sacrifice to a god. It is just the highest degree of evil. And yet that's what Manasseh did. Because he was so adamant about erasing God from the country, he killed the prophets, the priests, and it said that all of Jerusalem was filled with the blood of innocent people. Remember, it's believed that he slaughtered the prophet Isaiah. He was an incredibly evil man. And that is right where Judah was, following along behind this horribly evil king. Well, at last he died after 55 years, which is a long time and a lot of evil. And his son Ammon took the throne. He was only on the throne 2 years when his very own servants murdered him. It's as if some of the servants saw that this was way too much evil. And they put his 8-year-old son, Josiah, on the throne. And it's right about that time that God calls our Zephaniah to speak the words of God. Remember, a prophet speaks literally the words of God. He is God's mouthpiece. The book is written by Zephaniah, and the key phrase, and you're going to see it come up over and over and over again, is the day of the Lord. Now remember, we have told you that the day of the Lord usually applies to a day of great judgment. The day of the Lord, God will judge, and it will be a time of great wrath and great destruction. But the day of the Lord also can refer to that time when Christ comes back again and restores the world to Jesus Christ. It will be a time of great blessing. So it can either be a time of great wrath or great blessing, and you'll need to read around the context in order to decide which one it is. If you will look at that very first verse, it says, the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah. Now listen to his genealogy. This is the longest genealogy of any prophet that is given. Usually if a prophet gives a genealogy, he just says, I am the son of. But not with Zephaniah. He is the son of Cushi, he's the son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah in the days of Josiah. Now what this means is that he is related to King Hezekiah. That means that he is of royal blood. He probably actually served in the court. He is also probably related to Josiah the king. He may be a cousin of Josiah the king. So right off the bat, what Zephaniah is giving us is a hint that he is a man of authority and that he is to be listened to. I will tell you that that is all you're going to find out about Zephaniah. Because unlike Jonah, which was really such a interesting, fun book because it told you so much about the author, you are going to learn nothing about the author in Zephaniah because this isn't about the author. These are harsh, harsh words of judgment from the living God. The first verse, you're going to get an idea about how angry God is. I will completely remove all things from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. This is not good news. Because when he says all things, he means all things. Now, he has not said these words or any words similar to this since the flood. Remember, before the flood, he said, I am sorry I have made man, and I am going to destroy man from the face of the earth. And he did, except for Noah and his family. You see, when God says these words, he has literally reached the end of his rope. And now you're going to find out who he's going to destroy from the face of the earth. I am going to first remove man. Man will be the first one to go. I want you to remember in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, where we saw the order of creation, man was the last thing God created. It was the epitome of all creation was man. Here, he is going to go backwards. He is going to start with man, and he will move down. First, he will remove man. Then he is going to remove the beasts. Then he will remove the birds. And last, he's going to remove the fish. He will remove all things from the face of the earth. Now he's going to move a little farther. He's showed you physically what he's going to remove, and now he's going to show you spiritually what he's going to remove. And he uses the words cut off. I am going to cut off the remnant of Baal from this place and the names of the idolatrous priests, those who led people to worship idols, and those who worshiped idols are the first ones to go. I will remove the idol worshipers. Now I'm going to remove those who bow down on the housetops to the hosts of heaven, those who practice astrology. God says, I will not let a man who is double-minded stay on the face of the earth. I will cut him off. He goes on to say, I will remove those who have turned back from following the Lord. First, we start with the idol worshipers. And then we go to those who are double-minded. Now he's going to remove those who once followed the Lord, but now have said, that's not for me anymore, and have turned back from following the Lord. And lastly, he says, I will remove those who have never sought the Lord. The idol worshipers, the double-minded, those who used to seek God but don't anymore, and lastly, those who really worship themselves. Those would be the atheists, the agnostics, those who have no need for God because they are so impressed with their own self, their own power, and their own independence. You see, God says, I am going to cut them off from the face of the earth. These are words of incredible judgment. They are as harsh as God can speak. Why? Because he is talking to a nation who is so evil and has gone so far away from him. Even in these words of judgment and harshness, it all comes from the heart of a God who's saying, I love you. I love you. I cannot allow you to continue in this evil way. I love you, and if you do not turn back, I will surely wipe you off from the face of the earth. Now he goes on to tell you who he's going to punish. And if you will look with me, he says, I will punish. First, he is going to completely remove, and then he is going to cut off, and now he's going to punish the princes and the king's sons who clothe themselves in foreign garments. Well, you might say, what does that mean? I can't wear anything that was made in France? What that means is that these people were turning from God and God's ways and looking out to foreign nations to pick up their ways because they thought God's ways were not good enough. He goes on to say, and I will punish those who leap on the temple threshold. Now you think, what in the world is that about? Well, it could be two different things. First of all, it could be, if you remember back in 1 Samuel 5:5, the people would step over the threshold going into the temple of Dagon, who was another god. It could mean that. It also could mean those who would break into the temple or break into other people's homes to steal from them. He goes on to say, I will punish those who are violent and deceitful. Now, violence is pretty, we can see that very clearly. But deceitfulness can run rampant, and we can let it go because we're not even aware that it's being done. You see, these people were violent, but they also were looking out for number one. And when you look out for number one, you can become very deceitful. You will do and say anything that it takes to make sure that moi, number one, gets their way. And so he says, I am going to completely punish those people in that day. And lastly, down in verse 12, he says this, and I think this is a wonderful verse to keep in mind. I am going to punish those people who are stagnant in spirit, who say in their hearts, God will do nothing good or nothing bad. You've been there. I've been there. When I get the opinion that God is in heaven and he's so busy taking care of all those other people who are real naughty, that he's not going to work on my behalf for good or bad. In other words, he's just going to keep out of my business and I can go on living life the way I want to live. And yet God says, I will punish that person. Do not ever think that God is too busy and he will ignore your sin. He will never ignore your sin. Do not ever believe also that God is too busy to ignore your pain. He will not. God is never too busy for you. He will keep his eye on you. It is good news when we're good. It is bad news when we are naughty. And now he is going to go on and tell you what his wrath is going to look like. It's our very worst nightmare. For any science fiction movie we've ever seen, this is going to be worse than we could ever imagine because it is coming from the living God. His wrath is spoken in couplets to scare us out of our sin and saying, when my wrath comes, it is going to be doubly terrible. It will come in chapter 1, verse 15. In that day of wrath, there will be trouble and distress. Distress is a worse degree of trouble. There will be destruction And then he uses the word desolation. So you get the picture that not only are things destroyed, but after that there is a quiet hush and everything is desolate. It will be a day of darkness and gloom and clouds and thick darkness. This refers not only to just the fact that it's going to be a gloomy day, it is going to be a darkness of soul, an incredible gloominess, heaviness of soul, a depth of depression that we probably do not see at all today, because this horror will be so horrible. Lastly, he says it will be of trumpet and battle cry. Why trumpet and battle cry? Because he is talking to the nation of Judah, and what he is saying is, you know what? I'm going to bring a nation down against you. They're the ones that are going to make you desolate. They are the ones that are going to be so terrible. They are the ones that are going to be the trouble. It will be war in Jerusalem. And the people were living in their own evilness, thinking God was not going to do anything about it. He says all of the world, all of the earth will be devoured in the fire of his jealousy. Do you think that your God is jealous of your affections? Do you remember in the book of Hosea, he painted such a beautiful picture for us of his love for us, that he saw us as his bride. And remember, I said that he doesn't want us to have any other boyfriends. We cannot have any other lovers other than our great and wonderful God, because he is all we need. And if we turn our eyes to other lovers, just like Manasseh, we will spiral down into evil that will shock our very own souls. He will have no other lovers. Now when he starts in chapter 2, it's as if he's just spoken all of these words of trouble and distress, and he just wants to give us one more plea. And it comes from the heart of a gracious God. He said, it's as if everything just stops, and he's not going to talk about wrath anymore. And you can hear his voice say, seek the Lord. Seek me. Turn from evil. Seek righteousness. Seek humility. What he says is, seek me. And then after you have sought me and found me, now live in my ways. They are good ways. They are ways that will bring you great blessing. And lastly, live in my attitude. Now, humility doesn't mean that you just walk around feeling beaten down all the day. Humility is great strength. Because what a man does who is humble before God is he recognizes who God is in all of his glory, in all of his power, and in all of his incredible love. And he realizes who he is, a child deeply loved by God, who is provided for by the living God, who is protected by the living God, who has freedom from guilt to live victoriously. That is what humility is. It is a good thing to be humble before the living God. He says, perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. Then he goes around. He has now set his judgment on Jerusalem and Judah. And now he is going to open up the field to all of the Gentiles. In other words, we won't be spared. And he is going to start with Philistia. He is going to name 4 nations. And what he's really doing is saying the north, the south, the east, and the west will be destroyed. Although he names the nations, what he's really saying is it's the entire world. For Philistia, he says, woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast. The word of the Lord is against you. The coasts will be destroyed, but for the remnant of the house of Judah. Isn't that interesting? He's going to say Philistia is going to be destroyed, but there will come a time when this land will all be given back to Judah. And then he goes to the east, to Moab, and he says, woe against you, I will destroy you. You know why? You taunted my people. You acted arrogantly before them. You did not support them and help them. You will be destroyed. And then to Ethiopia in the south, you will be destroyed, he says to the Ethiopians. You will be slain by my sword. And then he goes to Assyria. And boy, do we not know a lot about Assyria. And he said, I will destroy Assyria, and God will make Nineveh a desolation. Here's what he says about Nineveh. Remember, I told you in Jonah that Nineveh, even from the book of Genesis, was called a great city by God himself. And here's what he says. This is the exultant city which dwells securely, who says in her heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. How she has become a desolation, a resting place for beasts. Everyone who passes by her will wave his hand in contempt. 12 years after Zephaniah spoke these words, the Babylonians came to Nineveh, put her in a siege position for 3 months. The Tigris River flooded, and they were able to break the walls of the city. Nineveh was totally destroyed and was exactly like God said it would be. If God says it, no, it will happen. And then he comes back to Jerusalem. Now, he has just talked about Nineveh, calling it Nineveh the exultant city. He comes back to Jerusalem and he said, but you are a rebellious city. Why were they rebellious? They had the law of God. They had the temple. They had God's presence there. They were God's chosen people. They were rebellious. They heeded no voice. They heeded no instruction. They did not trust in the living God, and they did not draw near to him. They were foolish beyond imagination. And he will go on to say, do you think I will destroy all the nations around you and yet not destroy you? Worse, I will, Jerusalem, destroy you. And as we know, in 586, Jerusalem was destroyed, as was Judah, and they were carted off to Babylon. But he can't end there. This God of ours cannot end with judgment. He must give us hope. And when you come here to verse 9, chapter 3, he is now going to give us a picture that is what our hearts long for. For then I am going to give the people purified lips, and they will call on the name of the Lord, and they will serve God shoulder to shoulder. And there will be immense joy. He goes on to say, there will be no shame. Do you know what he's saying? You will be purified. Your heart and your mind will be purified. You will not be speaking evil. You will not have evil thoughts. You will go back to where Adam and Eve were in the garden without a sin nature. So there will be no shame. All of your sin is going to be blotted from your mind, so you will be free to live life as God longs for us to live. He says that there will be, never again will there be haughtiness, that pride, that arrogance that takes hold of our very souls. They will take refuge in the Lord. And now there's just a praise of God. And ladies, when you read these words, again, sometimes I think God's words of love to us almost break our heart, because it truly comes from a God who is a lover. The Lord your God is in your midst, a victorious warrior. Do you know who this is? This is a picture of Jesus Christ. It says in Revelation that Christ will come back, a victorious warrior, and he will gather his loved ones to him. And here Zephaniah is prophesying what is going to happen in the second coming of Christ. And he will exalt over you with joy. Sometimes I just can imagine that God loves me, and there will come a time where he will throw back his head and laugh in joy because of all of the children that he loves so much. He will exalt over us with joy. He is going to be quiet in his love and rejoice over us with shouts of joy. We will be home, and it will be a great day of the Lord. This tiny little book has so many words of judgment, so many words of wrath. But it was this little book that probably won the heart of that 8-year-old King Josiah. And at the age of 16, as Zephaniah was working in his life, this young king, who had a terrible father and a terrible grandfather, turned to the living God and began to seek him earnestly. By the age of 20, he was clearing out the land and took out every bit of idol worship in the entire land, even up into the areas of Israel. He rebuilt the temple, he reinstated the law, and they celebrated the greatest Passover that was ever celebrated in Jerusalem. But even though it looked good on the outside, 35 years after Josiah's death, Jerusalem would turn back to those gods and would be destroyed. But they were not left without hope, because God had promised them, the day will come when you will come back. And I am going to rejoice over you, my beloved children, with great joy.